Tropical storm Elsa moves towards Florida after sweeping through the Caribbean. Chile's Constitutional Convention Assembly resumes after protests. And 45 people have been killed after a military plane crashed in the Philippines. Hello and welcome to teleSUR. I'm José Daniel López in Quito, Ecuador, and this is from the south. Tropical storm Elsa has slowed down on Sunday as it moves away from Haiti towards Jamaica and Cuba. The National Hurricane Center has reported that Elsa was moving northwest at 14 miles per hour with maximum sustained winds of 65 miles. Its center was located 85 miles east of Kingston, Jamaica. Late Saturday, the storm has battered parts of the Dominican Republic and Haiti with heavy rains and high winds in its center path to the south. According to the Hurricane Center, Elsa is moving very near Jamaica and parts of eastern and central Cuba, where hurricane conditions are possible later Sunday. In other news, the inauguration ceremony for Chile's new constitutional convention was suspended Sunday amid clashes between the police and protesters in the capital, Santiago. The inauguration had been planned for 10 a.m. local time, but was postponed as police fired tear gas and used water cannons to disperse crowds outside the former Congress building. Some elected assembly members refused to participate in the ceremony as long as police special forces remain near the building. Chilean electoral officials say they will try to resume the inauguration ceremony later during the day.
I have also decided to invite you to suspend this session until noon today in order to ensure that the country is calm and that we can have the solemn audience as appropriate to these authorities and to our country.
And after 3 hours, the session was resumed, although some constituent members did not return to the ceremony due to the protests. The reporting Secretary of the Election Qualifying Court, Carmen Gloria Valladares, sworn in the 155 members of the Constitutional Convention. This convention will have approximately 9 to 12 months to draft a new constitution. Hundreds of Brazilians have taken to the streets once again in Rio de Janeiro to demonstrate against President Jair Bolsonaro's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. Protesters marched in the streets calling for the president's impeachment and demanding for more vaccines. Bolsonaro's popularity has put to test over his response to the pandemic, which has left over 500,000 people dead in the country. Brazil has the second highest death toll in the world after the US. It also has the third highest number of coronavirus cases at more than 16 million.
It is no longer possible to bear and tolerate the behavior that the country is being led by the genocidal president we have here.
There are more than 500,000 people dead, and what everyone knew has been explained now. There was corruption. So keeping a government like that, it is craziness.
And Brazilian prosecutors have opened an investigation into allegations that President Jair Bolsonaro sat on corruption evidence in a COVID vaccine negotiation. The Attorney General's office has reported that it had informed the Brazilian Federal Supreme Court of the opening of an investigation into events reported by 3 senators who have formally asked for an investigation of the far-right president. The Senate Commission is looking into the government's handling of the pandemic and was told last week that a deal to purchase the Covaxin vaccine was a front to embezzle millions of dollars masterminded by a Bolsonaro ally and that the president knew all about it. Bolsonaro will also be investigated by the Supreme Court for possibly being involved in cybercrime. Judge Alexandre de Moraes ordered the opening of an investigation into a possible digital criminal group linked to the Bolsonaro's family, with the aim of attacking institutions and undermining democracy. The case is linked to protests in favor of closing the Supreme Court and Congress and the return of a dictatorship. The United Nations mission in Colombia has issued a warning on the increase in the killings of former combatants and community leaders. A report on the killings, which describes the impact of the demonstrations, is due to be submitted on July 13 to the UN Security Council. According to the report, 54 civilians and 2 police officers had been killed during protests and hundreds had been injured. The report also says 49 social leaders and human rights defenders have been murdered. Peru's Ministry of Justice and Human Rights has refused to provide comprehensive reparations to women who were victims of forced sterilizations in the 1990s. Ana Maria Vidal, lawyer for women's rights group Demus, stressed that the sterilizations were a proven case of violation of fundamental rights under the administration of former President Alberto Fujimori. About 350,000 women were sterilized without their consent under a program launched in 1996, which Fujimori said was aimed at tackling poverty by cutting birth rates. Victims also condemned statements made by presidential candidate and daughter of Fujimori, who denied the forced sterilizations and claimed they were part of a family planning program. Emergency workers have managed to put out a fire that was caused by a gas leak in west of Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. The company Pemex suspects that a gas leak from an underwater pipeline sparked the blaze. It took more than 5 hours to fully put out the fire, and no injuries have been reported from the fire, and the oil company's production was not affected. Investigations on the blaze are still going on. Guatemala has received 200,000 Sputnik V COVID-19 vaccines from Russia following a controversy over the delay of the delivery of 8 million doses. The arrival of the Sputnik V vaccines comes after the government of President Alejandro Yamatei said that it was seeking to renegotiate the contract with Russia due to delays. Guatemala has paid $79.6 million to the Russian Direct Investment Fund for 8 million doses of Sputnik V, of which it had only received 150,000. The contract is for 16 million doses, but the government has said that it will not make more disbursements until the certain more shipments will arrive.
We are receiving a new bag of a Sputnik vaccine. We are receiving today at this moment. We are making it a public. It is a vaccine that is going to be used mainly to start with the vaccination of the teachers from Monday onwards. We will also be vaccinating in the general population, which is included in the national plan. But we will also give to priority the teachers in order to reactivate education at the national level as soon as possible.
The Argentine Airlines has departed to China to pick up the first batch of the COVID-19 vaccine produced by China's Sinopharm company. The batch is the first of 24 million doses purchased by Argentina from the Chinese National Pharmaceutical Group. Meanwhile, Argentina and Russia have agreed to manufacture the Sputnik V vaccine, which in Argentina will be called the Sputnik Vida or Life. Most of the country's 45 million people have been inoculated. The death toll rises to 24 at the Florida building collapse. Meanwhile, 121 people are still missing. 2 more victims were found in the rubble of a partially collapsed apartment building in Florida on Saturday, bringing the death toll from last week's tragedy to 24, officials said. Demolition workers are preparing to bring down the rest of the building, and they hope that this operation will open up new areas for rescue teams to continue with the search. More news in a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back. 45 people have been killed after a military plane crashed in southern Philippines. Dozens more are reported to have been pulled out alive from the burning wreckage with some critical injury. The plane was carrying more than 90 people when it overshot the runway on Jolo Island. 5 people who were on board are still missing, and military rescue workers are still conducting a search operation around the area. Philippines Army officials say there was no sign that the aircraft had been attacked. Rescue teams are racing against time to search for survivors and clean up debris in central Japan after a number of mudslides. According to authorities, the incident has left 2 people dead and 20 missing on Saturday morning. The disaster struck at about 10 a.m. local time in Atami City, southwest of Tokyo, as heavy rainfall swept areas along the Pacific coast in central and eastern Japan. At least 130 buildings at Isuwa district of Atami were damaged due to the mudslide, according to local officials.
I went to the site and heard bam. Then I was shocked to see my friend's house was washed down by the mudslide. I cannot help screaming at the moment. It's so horrible. Another mudslide took place minutes later, and it just happened again and again, creating huge roars each time. There are some people I knew live in the disaster-hit area, so I am really worried about them, but I don't know how they're doing.
And local people have gathered in an evacuation center on Sunday after the mudslide that hit the Japanese coastal town of Atami the previous day. Rescuers searched for possible survivors, climbing on cracked roofs and searching cars that were thrown on top of buildings as rain continues to batter the region.
When I opened the door, everyone was rushing into the street, and a policeman came up to me and said, "What are you doing here? You have to hurry. Everyone is evacuating. The ground collapsed right next to you." So I went out in the rain in a hurry without changing with just a bag.
The landslide warning siren sounded, but at first I didn't think it was going to be that bad. But when I stepped outside later, the rumbling of the ground all around was very strong.
Taliban fighters have captured key districts in Badashan and Kandahar provinces as Afghan troops flee to neighboring Tajikistan. A statement released by the State Committee for National Security, more than 300 Afghan military men crossed from Afghanistan's Badashan province as Taliban fighters advanced towards the border. Families have also fled the area. The captured Kandahar province is originally Taliban's birthplace, which went on to rule Afghanistan until they were overthrown by a US-led invasion in 2001. The Taliban now controls roughly a third of all 421 districts and several district centers in Afghanistan.
There is no peace. Would peace be making the people suffer? If one helicopter comes, it will be enough for all of Kandahar. Why don't they use helicopters against the Taliban? They targeted me and were trying to kill me. If they kill me, then who would look after my children?
The situation is getting worse. The police and border forces are faced with equipment problems. The commandos and National Army are based a bit far away, and we are on the front line.
Indonesian hospitals have run out of oxygen as COVID-19 continues rising in the Asian country. Several hospitals across Indonesia have reported about the severe lack of oxygen cylinders and have attributed the shortage to soaring COVID-19 cases. Patients have been forced to buy their own oxygen tanks to save their infected members. Indonesia is experiencing a new wave of the pandemic driven by the highly contagious Delta variant.
This line is up to 20 meters long. I have been waiting for 1 hour. My husband is in the hospital and the staff told us they have run out of oxygen, so we have to look for tanks ourselves.
Portugal has been placed under nighttime curfew to curb a rising fourth wave of COVID-19. Under the new rules, nearly 4 million people will be banned from leaving their homes between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. In areas designated high risk or very high risk, restaurants, businesses, and cultural venues must cut back their opening hours and the number of visitors and clients. Weekend travel between Lisbon and the rest of the country has already been banned for the past 2 weeks as authorities wrap up testing and vaccination.
It's the best thing to do, and I advise everyone to come and get tested to end this pandemic. I am in favor of a curfew because at night nobody respects anything. It is a shame what you see at night in Lisbon. It doesn't affect me. I think it is a good idea. We should have been stricter before. We created this vaccination center to help the Ministry of Health and to accelerate the vaccination process at a higher rate in order to protect the population more quickly. It is linked with the progression of the pandemic, with the vaccines, and the reinforcement of the army for the Ministry of Health. Our goal is to accelerate, to vaccinate the greatest number of people in a very short time.
Cuban-made vaccines have been praised for having high efficiency rates. The 5 jabs candidates under development has passed all 3 clinical phases internationally required for vaccines. One of them, Abdallah, has shown efficiency of 92.8%. The other, Soberana 02, registered 62% efficiency. In relation with the ethical principles of the Cuban Revolution, the vaccines will be made available to fellow developing countries under fair conditions.
The serious problem we have had and we continue to have in our region is precisely the availability of vaccines. All our countries have started to vaccinate, but we are going slowly because, of course, we depend on this valuable input.
Just like everything Cuba does, just like it sends doctors on missions, this vaccine is going to be useful for all the countries that are poor, that are less developed.
The Cuban Ministry of Foreign Affairs has rejected a defamatory campaign by the United States alleging that Cuba engages in human trafficking. In a statement, the ministry said the falsehoods had been instigated by the U.S. most reactionary and corrupt sectors, including extremist groups of Cuban origin represented in Congress by the likes of Senators Marco Rubio and Robert Menendez. Cuba reiterated its commitment to zero tolerance on human trafficking in any form, adding that rather the country has a track record of preventing and combating trafficking in accordance to international laws. The Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has criticized Washington over its military threats and pressure on North Korea. He was speaking during a 3-day World Peace Forum hosted by the Tsinghua University and the Chinese People's Institute of Foreign Affairs.
The United States should reflect on the military threats and pressures it has continuously imposed on North Korea over the past decades. Take North Korea's legitimate concerns seriously and address them, taking into account the measures that North Korea has taken to denuclearize and ease the situation. The United States should respond with sincerity.
And we have more stories coming up after one last break, so stay tuned. Welcome back. Egypt has officially unveiled a strategic Mediterranean naval base. The naval base, which is set to secure shipping lines in the Mediterranean Sea, was officially opened by the country's president, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. The new military base, located 255 kilometers west of Alexandria towards the border with Libya, will be focused on securing the country's northern and western front. Egypt has 3 other naval bases in the Mediterranean and 1 in the Red Sea. A South African top court has agreed to hear former President Jacob Zuma's challenge against his legal sentence on contempt charges. The country's constitutional court sentenced Zuma to 15 months in jail on Tuesday for failing to appear at the corruption inquiry led by Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo in February. Zuma was initially given until the end of Sunday to hand himself in, after which police will be obliged to arrest him, but the court has agreed to hear his application on July 12th. And scores of supporters of the South African former leader Jacob Zuma, who were camping outside his hometown, have vowed to make the country ungovernable if he is arrested, and are now calling for the country's President Cyril Ramaphosa to resign.
We are here to say Ramaphosa must step down.
Back ANC from Stellenbosch!
Must step down.
As from Monday,
we will make the country ungovernable. We'll make the country ungovernable.
Thousands have taken to the streets in Burkina Faso's capital, Ouagadougou, to protest against rising jihadist killings. The protest came after 130 people were killed last month in a jihadist massacre. The protesters demanded the government to ensure security from the attackers and that thousands of people displaced by fighting be allowed to return to their homes peacefully. The West African country has been facing an increase in attacks by jihadist groups linked to Al-Qaeda or the Islamic State since 2015.
This is the place for us to call on the head of state to take the problem seriously, because you know that is inadmissible that people can walk around with impunity in our territory, committing despicable acts and live serenely.
Women activists in Senegal had demonstrated in the capital Dakar against increasing rape cases in the African country. Dozens of the demonstrators denounced the country's justice system for not issuing the different sentence to rapists. They also slammed the country's cultural system for being harsh towards women. The activists demanded the government to provide structures, shelters, and everything needed to support rape victims.
We expect the state to provide structures, shelters, and everything needed to support victims. What we want from the state today is for women, who make up more than half the population, to feel safe. And if we don't feel safe in our homes, if we don't feel safe in the street, and we don't feel safe at all with the state and the justice system, there is a problem. And we cannot continue to live in a country that does not consider us.
Ethiopian soldiers captured by the Tigray Defense Force have walked towards Mekelle, the rehabilitation center in the capital of the Tigray region. According to the Tigray Defense Forces, more than 7,000 captured Ethiopian soldiers have walked from the Abdib Eshir, about 75 kilometers southwest of Mekelle, for 4 days. The rebels marched into the city this week after local officials and federal government troops pulled out, and the government of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has since declared a unilateral ceasefire. At least 4 people have lost their lives after one of the worst forest fires ran ablaze in Cyprus. The fire, which started on Saturday afternoon, destroyed homes and forced thousands of people to be evacuated from their villages. Several countries have deployed firefighter aircraft to the Mediterranean island to try to put out the fire. The fire has been described to be the largest since 1974. Cyprus local media has reported that a 67-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion starting the blaze.
I saw the fire approaching from the top of the mountains. Immediately, we took the car of my child and we drove towards Pharmacas. We informed the authorities that there was a fire, but unfortunately, the planes and the fire services arrived very late.
Thousands have taken to the streets of Madrid, Spain on Saturday to participate in this year's Pride Parade. The demonstration has returned to the streets of Madrid, limited to 25,000 people with mandatory face masks and social distancing, but also encouraged by Spain's recent first step to legalize gender self-determination. The Spanish cabinet on Tuesday passed a draft bill on LGBT rights that will seek parliamentary approval to allow transgender people over 16 to freely change their gender and name without doctors or witnesses intervening in the process. However, the proposal could still change during a parliamentary debate of the legal draft.
Well, this year is going to be a little weaker than other years due to the pandemic. But little by little, we will return it to what it was before, if God wants. There will be no floats, but it doesn't matter. What matters is to celebrate it and for people to realize that nothing is happening and we are not hurting anyone.
And with this, we come to the end of this news brief. And remember, you can find this and many other stories in our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. Thank you for watching.